So much of the modern worship music sound comes from the drums. While some churches still think that the drums are of the devil, and while it is true that you do not need drums in order to worship the Lord, drums are arguably the most important instrument in modern worship music today. By that I mean the drums, probably more than any other instrument, can make or break the entire worship set. Other musicians on stage can hide their mistakes reasonably well, not so the drummer. But don't fear. If you are a drummer or a worship leader who is trying to speak the drummer's language and give them direction, we're going to walk through some super helpful tips in today's Weekly Worship Thoughts. The fundamental frequencies for the drum set are all over the place. The drummer is essentially playing 5 to 10 instruments all at once. The fundamental frequencies of the kick drum may be anywhere from 20 hertz to 100 hertz, while the fundamental frequencies of the cymbals may be anywhere from 8K to 20K. All right, so let's look at the individual instruments here on the drum set. The first thing you might think of is the kick drum. And the kick drum obviously is going to be your low frequencies. The fundamental frequencies are all the way down at 60 hertz, maybe 80 hertz, maybe 100 hertz, depending on how you have it tuned. And then of course you're going to get like the beat and the attack of it all the way up at like 1.5K, maybe even up at 3K. So that's the kick drum. Next we'll go to the snare drum, and the snare has a little bit of a rattle underneath it, which makes a pretty cool sound. So that is your snare drum, and you're getting a lot of kind of the beef down in the low mid frequency. Again, depending on how you have the thing tuned, but that high smack and rattle is going to be up again around 1000 hertz, 1K, maybe even 2.5. And moving on with the shells, I've got 2 toms on this particular drum set, and then so we've got basically a rack tom and then a floor tom. Sometimes you've got several rack toms, several floor toms, whatever. And typically these drums are going to be tuned highest to lowest. In fact, when you get down to the floor tom, sometimes there's not a big difference between a floor tom and a kick drum. In fact, a lot of times I even mic my lowest floor tom with a kick drum microphone. But this is for our set here. This is what the high rack sounds like. So it's got a nice sound to it, really helps to cut in, especially for fills and things like that. And again, it's got a pretty low end frequency to it, so you've got a low mid thing happening, the rumble of it, but the attack and the beater is again all the way up at like 1K, maybe 2.5K, whatever. And then you got the floor tom. Nice and low, probably really sounding great around 80 hertz, maybe 120. And then again, you still have a little bit of an attack. There you go, there's all the shells of your kit. And then we start getting into the different cymbals, and the main cymbal that you're going to use is going to be the hi-hat. So it's got a ton of high end. In fact, for the hi-hat, I almost always do a high pass filter or a low cut depending on the board, and just let those high-end frequencies come through. In fact, a lot of times I turn the hi-hat off altogether because the overhead mics are picking up the hi-hat. But the hi-hat is going to be your main rhythm. And you can get 2 main sounds out of the hi-hat. You got that click and a click and a click, but then if you open it up, it can get really nice and sloppy too. Then we've got our cymbals here, mostly being picked up by overhead microphones. The main thing from the cymbals is that you've got a lot of times kind of a big crash cymbal. And then like to have a second option, a little bit of a different sound crash. And then you typically have a ride cymbal. It's a little bit lower in frequency. And a lot of times whenever you're playing a song, The crash works really well to kind of set a new thing that's happening or to end a fill or to begin a fill. But the ride a lot of times is what you'd use instead of the hi-hat. So let's take a look at that. We're going from the hi-hat. So those are all the different pieces of a typical drum set. The fundamental frequencies are not the only aspect of the drums that are all over the place. The dynamic range of an acoustic drum set can be anywhere from 70 dB to 112 dB, which is really loud. Drummers need to keep this in mind as they play, as a loud drum set can drown out the entire worship team and move the whole experience from music to noise. Noise is not what we are going for. Hitting the drums lighter, playing with lighter sticks, using root sticks, or even using an electronic drum set can be an ideal solution for drummers in a typical church setting. The drummer's musical buddy is the metronome. If you can't use a metronome while playing live, always use it to practice with. Especially use it when practicing your fills. The metronome doesn't lie. You really are that far off the beat when coming back from a fill. The most common phrase that I hear from drummers who are just starting to play with a metronome is, "This thing isn't working right." Yeah, it is. Good dynamics are achieved by adding intensity, but also by changing up which components of the drums you are hitting or how you are hitting them. For instance, you can be playing a closed hi-hat through the verse, and by simply opening the hi-hat in the chorus, you can make the song sound so much bigger. You can play on the rim of the snare during the verse and then strike the center of the snare for the chorus. Or you can add subdivided tom hits in the chorus along with a crash cymbal on the first beat of every measure to increase the dynamics of the song. Now, of course, because of the dynamic range of the drums, simply playing harder will increase the dynamics of the song as well. Too many drummers try to do way too much. Most of that extra playing is unnecessary at best and distracting at worst. As a drummer, do not play more than the song requires, and don't attempt to play too far above your current skill level. There is no faking it on the drums. You are exposed. Everyone, even non-musical people, will know when you are attempting to play a beat that you, in fact, cannot play. Avoid unnecessary non-musical fills at all times. I once played with a drummer who added a fill at the end of every single measure. He did this because he was bored and because he really wasn't that good. The irony is that his playing was actually super boring because you begin as the audience to anticipate the fact that every line is going to end in a fill. Technique matters. If you want to prolong the life of your cymbals and your drum heads, learn how to hit them correctly. The old joke is that playing drums is just a matter of hitting things. No, playing drums well consists of much more than that. One technique worth mastering, though it will take a while to master, is the 75-25 technique. Try playing the kick drum and the shells like the toms and the snare at 75% volume, while playing the hi-hat and the cymbals at roughly 25% volume. This basic dynamic starting point will typically give you the best balance of overall volume for the drums. Always remember that consistency is key. The entire band is depending on you to play the same thing every time. Every other instrument builds off of the drums, and when the drums fail to produce a solid, dependable, consistent foundation, it will throw everything else off. So map out the song, take notes, and actually use the notes that you take. And be smart with your arrangement. Simply playing each part of the song differently from the previous part isn't enough. Think through the journey on which you want to take people when they listen to the song. Where should you be big, busy, and loud? And where should you be small, sparse, and quiet? Think through the song and play intentionally. There is a time to be silent. Not every song needs drums, and not every part of every song needs drums. One of the most powerful techniques that you can learn as a drummer is the art of playing absolutely nothing until just the right time. If you are a drummer, what was one interesting truth or idea that stood out to you about your instrument? And how do you think that truth or idea will help you in the future? If you are not a drummer, what did you learn about how to effectively communicate with the drummers in your worship team? In your own words, How would you say the drums fit into the typical worship music pie? How big of a slice should they get? What is the main role for the drums in a typical worship team setting? How do the drums typically fit into your own worship team context? Do you think you typically give them too big of a slice, too small of a slice, or just right? Given the information you just received, what do you think is the number one thing that individual drummers in your specific worship team context should work on in order to improve the overall quality of the worship team as a whole?